So I want you to imagine that we are going to sit here and write a program, and in this program, we're going to ask the user for their name. So we'll say username equals, and we'll just get input here from the user. We're going to print their name, and we'll just pretend name is the variable that we're holding their name in. And then we're going to do a whole lot of other things. So we're just going to have this one big long file, and from top to bottom we're just going to put all kinds of code in here and make it do all kinds of different things. Now, as you can imagine, if I were to come back to you a year later and say, hey, we got a problem here, this thing's not performing exactly the way it needs to, and I need you to go in and fix this particular thing. Well, the problem that you're going to have is you've got one big long file, and it does all kinds of different things, and it's just one continuous long list of things, and everything's kind of hinged together. It's all in, because it's all in one big function, if you will, one big call. There's not a lot of organization that can be done, because if let's say that I have this particular field here that says print name, and then we go through and we execute some more code, and then down here I need to print name again. Well, I have to re-execute that code, and I got to tell it to print the thing. Or let's say that I've got some code that adds numbers together. So we've got some code that adds different numbers, and then later down here we've got to do the same thing, and we got to add those same numbers again. So we come in and add the numbers. Well, we got to duplicate all of the code that we had up here. We have to duplicate it down here. So we literally have got the same code written over and over throughout the source code. Now, that might not sound like a big deal on the surface, but what happens when I come in here and tell you to change what this thing's doing? I actually need this thing, instead of taking V1 plus V2, I need you to actually make it do V1 plus V2 divided by V3. So what this means is that everywhere that I've duplicated this code, I got to go find it. And goodness, I don't know how to go find it, because it doesn't really have any unique names. I can go in and look for this variable, but then that's going to show me everywhere that I used that particular set of variables, and that may or may not be where I want to change the code. So what happened is, and I'm kind of talking about this as if it was some kind of evolutionary process, but most of this stuff kind of went together at the same time. But we realized, or the people that came up with these languages realized, that that's not really a good way to deal with this. What we actually need to do is we need to come up with some way of dealing with functions. Now, all a function is a way to group our code. So we can come in and group our code in like manner. So for example, let's say that I have a function, and to keep this simple, I'm going to say function, and we're going to say add numbers. And we're going to pass in V1 and V2. And then we're going to have some code, and we're just going to tell it to return V1 plus V2. Well, what I've done is I've declared a function that only does one thing. That's all it does. It just does one particular point or one particular thing in the program. And so now what I want to do is I want to call that. So whenever I need it, I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to say add numbers, and we're going to send 2, 3. And by the way, I'm defining this function. It's kind of a C-style function, the way it's looking, or PHP, but don't pay too much attention to the actual formatting here. I'm more doing an example. We'll get into more semantics later when we get into the actual programming language. So right now I'm going to say V3 equals my add numbers. And then let's say that we go down in our code, and then later I need to add 2 more numbers. So I come down here and I add numbers again, and we'll add 4 and 5, and then we'll tell this is going to be V5. So what I'm doing here is I've got one function, one piece of information here that does one thing, and if something changes that I need to make a change to the inside of this function, I can just come up here and change what this function is doing, and none of these places that are calling that function have to change. Now, if I decide that instead of having 2 variables, we're actually going to come over here and get rid of the parenthesis there, and we'll say V2 and V3. Well, now I got to come in here and say plus V3, and then I would have to come down here and put another number on the ends of these guys to make them appropriate. So in that case, I would have to come change the individual functions because I've changed their prototype. I've changed their actual, think about it as the look of the function. I've changed the way that function looks. It's got 3 variables instead of just 2, and so I've got to come down here and make changes to all the different places. Now, in some programming languages, you do have the ability to set defaults for these things, which would mean that I wouldn't have to come change these prototypes or these calls. But not all languages support that, and I'll get into a little bit of that in some other videos. But the primary thing I want you to understand in this particular video is that functions are extremely useful. You should use them all the time. You don't want to use them too much because the more functions you have, the harder it is to follow the code because you're constantly having to jump from one function to the next, to the next, to the next, just to try to figure out what is going on. But you do want to try to have a single purpose for each function so that they're not doing a whole lot of different things, and because it will make your code a lot easier to read and a lot more stable because you get one function that does one thing perfectly, then you know that function is working properly and you don't have to go debug it. Then you can back up and debug the other functions that are doing other things until you figure out where your problems are. But it's very, very important to lay your code out in a way that is very easy for you to go back and look at later, because you will have to go back and look at it. And no matter how much you think it makes sense today, in 6 months it isn't going to make any sense at all. When you go in and start trying to figure out where a bug is, and you've got things laid out improperly, it will come back to bite you.